Morning light broke over the canopy, turning the ancient oak forest into a cathedral of gold. Rays of sun pierced the dense leaves, illuminating dust motes that danced in the quiet air. Below, the mossy floor stretched out, thick and damp, holding the silence of the night. Milo launched himself from a high limb, his claws finding purchase on the rough gray bark of a neighboring branch. Lily followed a heartbeat later, a blur of motion against the shadows. They moved with practiced ease, leaping across gaps that would have been impossible for anything heavier. Their claws clicked rhythmically against the wood, a sharp, staccato sound that echoed through the stillness. They reached the mid-level of the great oak, stopping abruptly on a sturdy, lichen-covered branch. Milo shook his fur, sending a spray of dew into the air. Lily chattered, her nose twitching as she scanned the surrounding foliage. For the first signs of the season's bounty. The air smelled of pine resin and wet earth. They turned toward the base of the tree. They scrambled down the trunk, spiraling toward the massive, gnarled roots that anchored the tree to the earth. The forest floor here was a tangle of ferns and damp soil, far removed from the sun-drenched heights of the canopy. Milo hit the ground first, his paws sinking slightly into the soft, dark loam. He began to forage, pushing aside thick layers of decaying leaves, but his movement faltered. He stopped. His tail went rigid, twitching once, then twice. He did not look for acorns. He stared at the base of the tree, tucked deep between two massive, moss-covered roots. Something unnatural broke the pattern of the bark. It was a circular wooden door, perfectly round. The wood was polished, dark, and smooth, standing in stark contrast to the rough, jagged surface of the surrounding oak. Lily scurried down to join him, her chatter dying in her throat as she saw it. They stood motionless, two small creatures dwarfed by the scale of the forest. Milo reached out, his paw hovering just a fraction of an inch from the leaf-shaped handle, his breath hitching in the quiet, expectant air. Milo tapped the wood twice. The sound was hollow, a sharp rap that echoed against the roots. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the circular door groaned, the hinges protesting as it swung outward into the dark hollow. A soft, amber glow spilled from the opening, casting long, dancing shadows across the moss. A tiny figure stepped over the threshold. He stood no taller than a blade of grass, his face framed by a thick, silver beard that reached his belt. He held a lantern aloft, the flame inside pulsing with a steady, rhythmic light. The figure stopped and lowered his head in a slow, precise bow. "I am Tilo, the forest Wichtel," he announced, his voice clear. "I maintain the balance of these woods." He moved with a deliberate, measured grace, turning his attention to a drooping fern nearby. With a gentle touch of his finger, he nudged the stem, and the plant straightened, its leaves unfurling to catch the light. The calm of the afternoon did not last. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the air grew unnaturally heavy, pressing against the forest floor. A low, rhythmic hum began to vibrate through the bark of the trees, deepening into a guttural roar. Leaves that had been still only moments before began to thrash violently. The wind arrived with sudden, brutal force, tearing through the canopy like a physical weight. It slammed into the hollow where the squirrels had spent weeks organizing their winter supply. Acorns, once neatly stacked and wedged into the safety of the wood, were ripped from their resting places. The gale did not discriminate. It churned through the hollow, tossing the hard shells into the air like dry pebbles. Milo and Lily scrambled to the edge of their branch, clinging to the rough wood. Below, the forest floor became a swirling vortex of debris. The wind howled, a high-pitched whistle that drowned out the creaking of the oaks. It drove the stash deep into the dark, tangled undergrowth, burying the winter food under layers of wet, wind-blown mulch. A final, massive surge of air swept through the clearing, catching the remaining acorns and hurling them toward the rushing stream. The hollow was now empty. The wind died as abruptly as it had arrived. Silence reclaimed the forest, thick and heavy, broken only by the occasional drip of water from saturated leaves. Dawn bled into the sky, a pale, gray light that revealed the extent of the wreckage. The canopy was thinned, branches stripped bare, and the forest floor was a mess of churned mud and debris. The squirrel family emerged from their shelter, moving slowly along the main branch. They reached the hollow that had held their winter security. It was empty. Not a single acorn remained. The wood was clean, scoured by the gale, leaving only faint scratches. Mama Squirrel stood at the edge, her nose twitching as she scanned the damp interior. Lily reached inside, her paws brushing against the bare grain of the wood. Nothing. Papa Squirrel paced the length of the branch. Milo broke the silence. He darted down the trunk, his claws digging into the bark, and stopped inches from the small wooden door. Tilo stood on the threshold, his lantern light flickering with a pale, rhythmic pulse. Milo gestured toward the empty hollow above, his paws trembling. "The storm took everything," Milo said. "Use your magic, bring it back." He waited, chest heaving, watching for the lantern to flare or the ground to shift. Tilo did not move. The Wichtel stood with his hands tucked into his belt, his beard resting against his chest. He looked up at the empty hollow, then back at the squirrel. Tilo shook his head slowly. The lantern light dimmed, casting long, sharp shadows across the roots. "Magic is a spark, not a solution," Tilo replied. "I maintain the balance of the woods, but I do not feed the winter. You must act." Milo stood frozen, his tail twitching against the dirt. Papa Squirrel descended from the branch, landing silently in the mud beside his son. The Wichtel stepped back into his home, closing the door. Papa Squirrel shook his head, a sharp, decisive movement, and gestured toward the forest floor. The family descended in a flurry of motion, claws gripping the rough bark as they leaped from the trunk to the damp earth. They hit the ground and fanned out immediately. Milo looked up, his eyes locking onto the swaying upper branches of a nearby oak. He sprinted to the trunk and began the ascent, his body a blur of brown fur against the gray wood. He reached the high canopy, moving out onto thin, flexible limbs to peer into the hidden crooks where acorns often lodged. Below him, Lily moved with a different rhythm. She pressed her nose into the thick, tangled undergrowth, pushing aside wet leaves. She moved in a systematic grid, checking every depression in the soil and every hollow beneath the ferns. They were scouring every inch of the woods, their claws working the earth and bark in a desperate, synchronized race. Milo dropped from the canopy, landing with a soft thud on a flat, moss-covered stone. He carried 3 acorns in his mouth. Lily emerged from the ferns a second later, her cheeks bulging with a handful of seeds. They met at the base of a large exposed root where Mama and Papa were waiting. Mama Squirrel took the acorns from Milo, her movements swift and practiced. She inspected each one, discarding the hollow shells and placing the sound nuts into a neat pile. Papa Squirrel took over the next step, rolling the selected acorns toward a dry, sheltered hollow beneath a nearby bramble. They worked in a tight, efficient circle. Milo and Lily returned to the search, their departures timed to ensure a constant supply. The chaos of the morning had vanished, replaced by the rhythmic pulse of their labor. Every movement was seamless. The sun climbed to its zenith, turning the forest air thick and heavy. The golden light, once a welcome warmth, now beat down on the squirrels with relentless intensity. Every muscle in their bodies burned from hours of repetitive motion. Milo felt the weight of the morning in his limbs, his movements slowing from a sharp dart to a sluggish crawl. He reached for a cluster of acorns near a patch of dry grass, but his paw trembled, missing the mark. He tried again, forcing his claws to grip the earth, but his breath came in ragged, shallow gasps that rattled in his chest. The rhythm of the assembly line faltered. He stumbled, his balance deserting him, and he collapsed onto a flat, sun-baked stone. His chest heaved, the fur on his flanks rising and falling with the effort to draw in cool air. He remained slumped on the stone, his head hanging low, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The silence of the stone was broken by the soft crunch of footsteps. Tilo climbed up, his movements fluid and unhurried. He sat beside Milo, his presence grounding the frantic energy of the clearing. He did not speak at first. He simply watched the family. Mama and Papa were moving in perfect sync, passing acorns down a line that spanned the length of the route. Lily was nearby, dragging a heavy branch to clear a path for the next haul. Tilo tapped his lantern against the stone, the light flickering with a steady, warm pulse. He pointed a thin finger toward the mound of acorns. "Look at them," Tilo said, his voice barely rising above the rustle of leaves. Milo lifted his head, his gaze following Tilo's gesture. "You think your strength is in your paws," Tilo continued, "but the forest is too vast for one. The effort you share is the true magic." Milo watched his father pass a nut to his mother, who placed it with precision. He stood up, his legs steady, and looked at Tilo. Milo stepped off the stone, his movements fluid and purposeful. He rejoined the line, his paws working with a renewed rhythmic precision. The forest floor was a blur of activity as the family continued their harvest. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing cry cut through the steady rustle of the leaves. The entire group froze. Papa Squirrel dropped an acorn, his ears swiveling toward the sound. It came from the direction of the stream, where the water churned against the jagged, moss-slicked rocks. Lily had moved ahead, scouting the low ground near the bank. She stood at the very edge of the water, her body tense, pointing toward a narrow crevice between two massive, water-worn boulders. Milo scrambled over the roots, his heart racing as he followed her gaze. Wedged deep within the dark, wet gap was a cluster of acorns, larger and more numerous than any they had found all day. They were trapped in a treacherous spot, caught where the current slammed against the stone with relentless force. The water sprayed upward, slicking the rocks until they shone like glass. Lily looked back at the group, her eyes wide, signaling the discovery. The prize was within reach, but the location was a death trap of slippery stone and surging icy water. Lily did not wait for the others to catch up. She crouched low, her paws gripping the edge of a moss-covered stone that vibrated with the force of the water. The acorns were just inches away, wedged firmly in a narrow gap between two slick, submerged rocks. She stretched her front limbs forward, her body lengthening until she was balanced on the very brink of the bank. The stream roared, a constant, deafening sound that drowned out the forest birds. As her fingers brushed the rough shell of an acorn, the water level surged. A sudden, violent wave slapped against the rock, spraying icy droplets into her eyes. She gasped, pulling back, but her rear paws lost their purchase on the slime-coated surface. She scrambled, her claws scraping uselessly against the wet stone as she slid toward the churning froth. The current grabbed at her, pulling her weight toward the center of the flow. She lunged again, desperate to anchor herself, but the rock tilted under her pressure. She was pinned now, one foot dangling over the dark, rushing water, her body trembling with the effort to stay upright. She looked back, her eyes wide with the realization that she was fighting for her footing. Tilo moved across the uneven ground with a speed that defied his small stature. He reached the bank just as the current threatened to pull Lily from her precarious perch. The water surged again, a dark, frothing mass that seemed to hunger for the small creature clinging to the stone. Tilo did not hesitate. He planted his feet firmly in the mud and raised his lantern high above his head. The glass casing of the lantern flared, shifting from a steady amber to a blinding, ethereal gold. A low hum resonated through the air, vibrating in the very roots of the trees. Suddenly, the water began to change. The violent, chaotic thrashing of the stream slowed, its surface smoothing into a glassy, viscous sheet. The golden light rippled outward, washing over the rocks and the churning foam. Where the light touched, the water seemed to lose its momentum, thickening as if moving through invisible honey. The roar of the river dropped to a dull, rhythmic thrum. Lily watched, frozen, as the surging tide retreated, pushed back by the weight of the golden glow. The stream held its breath, suspended in a moment of unnatural stillness, creating a narrow, dry path toward the trapped treasure. The forest went silent, waiting for the next movement. The golden glow held the water in a rigid, glassy state. Lily did not waste the reprieve. She lunged forward, her paws extending into the gap between the rocks. The acorns were wedged deep, their shells slick with silt. She hooked her claws into the cluster, pulling with every ounce of her strength. The wood groaned as the acorns shifted, but they remained stuck. The stream began to quiver. The golden light flickered, and the water's surface started to ripple with renewed intent. Lily braced her feet against the stone, arched her back, and gave a final desperate tug. The cluster popped free. She pulled them to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, the stream let out a sudden, guttural roar as the magic snapped. The water surged forward, a wall of cold, dark liquid rushing to reclaim its path. She scrambled backward, her claws scrabbling for purchase on the wet moss. She landed hard on the mud, tumbling into the grass just as the water slammed into the rocks where she had been standing seconds before. Lily scrambled up the trunk, the final cluster of acorns held firmly in her jaws. She dropped them onto the growing mound at the base of the hollow. The pile shifted, settling into a sturdy, rounded shape that dwarfed any collection they had managed in previous years. Milo, Papa, and Mama were already there, their fur matted with mud and leaf litter, their movements slow and heavy with exhaustion. They worked in silence, adding the last few pieces to the peak of the mountain of food. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest floor turned a deep, bruised purple. The squirrels stepped back, their breathing ragged, and looked at the result of their day. The pile was immense, a golden-brown monument to their labor. The wind had died down, leaving the air still and cool. They stood shoulder to shoulder, tails twitching in the fading light. The squirrels moved as one toward the base of the tree where Tilo stood. He remained near his door, his lantern casting a soft, amber glow. Milo stepped forward, holding a small object between his paws. It was an acorn shell, meticulously carved with fine, swirling patterns. He held it out, his paws steady despite the lingering fatigue in his limbs. Tilo reached out, his fingers brushing against the shell as he took it. He turned the ornament over, tracing the intricate lines with a look of quiet reverence. The silence between them was heavy, not with tension, but with the weight of a shared victory. Tilo looked up, his eyes reflecting the warm light. He stepped toward the wooden door and found a small, protruding root. With a gentle, deliberate motion, he hung the carved acorn there. It swayed slightly, a permanent mark of their alliance. The squirrels watched, their tails still, as the ornament caught the light. Tilo bowed, a slow and deep gesture of respect. The barrier between the forest dweller and the small guardian had dissolved. As the leaves turned from deep green to brittle gold, the forest underwent a transformation. The oak tree, once a site of frantic labor, became a quiet center of gravity. A hedgehog emerged from the thicket, sniffing the air, and stopped near the roots of the tree. It did not scurry away. Instead, it curled up near the base, finding shelter in the quiet space the squirrels had cleared. Soon after, a rabbit hopped into the clearing, ears twitching as it surveyed the area. It moved toward the squirrels, who were resting near the hollow, and settled into the grass without alarm. The tension that usually defined the forest floor had vanished. Other creatures followed, drawn by the stillness and the absence of conflict. They gathered in the golden light that filtered through the thinning canopy. Milo and Lily watched from a low branch, their movements calm and deliberate. They no longer darted in fear. They moved with the confidence of inhabitants who knew their home was secure. The woods were no longer a collection of isolated lives, but a connected web of presence. Where there had been competition for resources, there was now a shared space. The air felt lighter, and the sounds of the forest shifted from the sharp cries of alarm to the steady, rhythmic rustle of peaceful coexistence. The sanctuary had taken root, and the forest breathed in unison. One evening, as the first frost touched the edges of the leaves, Milo climbed down to the base of the tree. He found Tilo standing by his door, watching the sky. Milo hesitated, then moved closer, his paws pressing into the soft earth. He looked up at the tiny guardian and asked if he would remain here forever. Tilo did not answer immediately. He turned his gaze toward the stars, his expression unreadable in the dimming light. He looked back at the squirrel, then toward the family gathered in the hollow above. "I stay while I am needed," Tilo replied, his voice steady and low. "When you no longer require my help, it will be because you have learned to care for the forest and each other." Milo stood silent, processing the weight of the words. He looked at his own paws, then at the thriving clearing, and finally at the other animals resting nearby. The realization settled in, sharp and clear. Their strength was no longer a borrowed spark from a lantern, but a fire they had built themselves. Milo nodded, understanding that the greatest gift the Guardian had given them was the ability to stand on their own. The camera began its slow retreat, lifting away from the base of the ancient oak. Below, the tiny wooden door remained shut, its leaf-shaped handle still in the moonlight. The lantern light spilled out from the hollow, casting a warm, steady glow over the squirrels as they curled together for the night. They were a single, unified shape against the darkness of the roots. The light did not flicker or dim, it held firm, a testament to the rhythm they had mastered together. As the view widened, the entire forest floor came into focus, bathed in the soft, golden radiance of their home. Every branch, every leaf, and every creature nearby seemed to lean into the stillness. The squirrels remained motionless, their breathing synchronized, their presence a quiet anchor in the vast woods. The camera pulled back further until the tree became a small, glowing point. The harmony was absolute. The struggle had ended, replaced by a deep and enduring strength that would carry them through the coming winter. The light remained, steady and bright,